we have pulled together an absolutely outstanding panel of people who are going to talk about the retail landscape. We have among them is Jessica Truhan of DPI Specialty Foods, which provides retail customers with an extensive, highly varied selection of products from around the world. We have Tom Gillpatrick of Portland State University's Center for Retail Excellence, which has served as a kind of incubator for both innovative businesses and progressive business people. We have Carol Coren, a former staff member at OSU and Rutgers Food Innovation Centers, and now a principal at Cornerstone Ventures, a firm that develops triple bottom line opportunities for food-focused social enterprises. And moderating the panel, we have Kevin Coupe, the content guy for Morning News Beat, one of the most influential websites in retailing. So let's kick it off.
You can tell I wrote that introduction because I said it was one of the most influential websites in retailing. It is. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. This is a very, kind of a complicated scenario we're trying to describe for you in terms of how to get food into stores and into a variety of different places. There's retail, and then there's food service, and there's institutional. So there's lots of different kinds of opportunities and challenges in all of those. We had a slide which is not up, but that's okay. I can do this verbally. It's an enormous business when you come right down to it. I mean, all food sales in 2015 amounted to $1.3 trillion. That's a lot out there. It breaks down to roughly, let's see if I get this right, grocery stores, 34%, supermarkets, which are differentiated from grocery stores, 32.8%. That has to do with both SKUs and square footage. Clubs and superstores, 12.7%. Gas stations, 2.7%. Drugstores, 0.8%. And the number that really actually surprised me, e-commerce was just 0.7% of all food sales in the United States in 2015. That is so low, and it means that the ceiling is so high. If they just, if Amazon Fresh doubles that to like 1.5%, it's an enormous win, and yet that remains a very small piece of the pie. You may ask, where do convenience stores fit into that? These numbers were generated by the Food Institute, and they sort of they combine convenience stores as sometimes they're grocery stores and sometimes they're gas stations, depending on whether or not they have pumps or not. But it's an enormous business. So let me start with just kind of a basic 30,000-foot question, which is to say, there's all this business out there. There's all these categories. Oh, there it is. Son of a gun. There's all this business and all these categories. So in your minds, just to start with, where are the big opportunities? What is, forgive the cliche, what's the low-hanging fruit? Jessica. Wow. I'm sorry. I was hogging the microphone. I do that.
Boy, it's a loaded question because there are so many different trending categories at the moment, and some of them merge together. So Carol and Tom, you may have additions to this, of course, but I think definitely fermented foods is enormous at the moment. And fermented foods, anything with probiotic cultures or anything that aid you digestively, but also is handmade, is definitely taking time and care and love, which is huge in the marketplace right now. That seems to be one of the most interesting categories that we've had come up. There's a wonderful company out in the Gorge called Oregon Brineworks who comes up with a Beet Kvass, which has gotten all kinds of crazy interest lately, but 10 years ago, couldn't have done it.
I live in Connecticut. So what? Beet Kvass?
Yes.
What is, okay, explain that. I'm going to assume maybe there's a couple of people in the audience who don't know what that is. What is Beet Kvass?
Sure. It's a little difficult to describe, but imagine it like a fermented, almost vinegary juice that's made out of beet. And it's very sweet, and it's actually very good for you digestively. And if you love beets, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and beets are actually seeing a comeback.
Yes, beets. Everyone loves beets. Beets, cauliflower.
That borscht that those of you who are of my ethnic origin that you might have turned your back on is really, making a heyday. these days.
Absolutely. Yeah, yes, definitely.
Going back to our roots, as it were. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Probably fermented foods. I think the other thing that has been getting a lot of attention is anything local, everything local. And local is, of course, dependent on where you're from. So for us, of course, that's Portland, that's Seattle, that's anything made in the Northwest. If you're from Connecticut, it's going to be something from Connecticut, possibly from the surrounding region, depending on geography and so forth. So local is enormous, and it has been growing for the last couple of years. And I thought at some point we would see a ceiling like you tend to with most food trends, but I think because people's values are catching up with the food stream, and the food stream, you guys are doing amazing things, creating these wonderful products locally. I don't think it can have a ceiling for a little while longer. I'm very excited to see how this goes. So,
yeah, I think that foods that can legitimately link themselves to lifestyles of health and sustainability, LOHAS, a word that those of you who are not familiar with it, look it up, L-O-H-A-S, LOHAS, a term that the Nielsen firm has popularized and has been tracking for, gee, Tom, maybe 10, 15 years now. Yeah, and if you can begin to attach a value in the LOHAS categories to your product, you'll be able to position yourself better. But certainly, as we've just heard, local, fresh, and the extent to which you can attach a claim as to the health promoting capability that your food will bring to the body will be useful. Additionally, the extent to which the food will make your life easier is a really important value proposition for you to offer the retailer, to offer the customer. Time is a consideration that the customer is beginning to attach to their purchase decision. The amount of time it takes for me to make it, the amount of time it takes for me to serve it.
I agree with everything that has just been said, and I think one of the things I'd just like to point out what's not being said is that a lot of what you see today as hot and trendy is not coming from the big food companies. And they are struggling. So from that, I see a wonderful opportunity for lots of new and developing companies. And there's Portland is an epicenter, as Dean Conley said earlier, for food innovation. We also see the big companies trying to better understand this by putting more and more natural, fresh ingredients into their products. And the trend that I'm very interested in is particularly on the retail and distribution side, who are all very interested in getting these new hot products that resonate into the market into their distribution.
And I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of big companies recognize that. It was at a story on Morning Newsbeat on Friday about how Campbell Soup has just announced that they are creating a $125 or $150 million venture capital fund that they wanted to put specifically into small producers. They understand that being, big food, and we can talk a little bit more about this as we go on, big food is becoming more suspect in a lot of quarters than it used to be. And Campbell Soup has sort of recognized that as, sort of the emblematic of big food in a lot of ways, that they have to sort of spread their bets around and find windows of innovation that maybe they don't have access to in Camden, New Jersey. Go figure. I apologize to anybody from Jersey. But let me push back on something that you guys just talked about a little bit. And if only because, we all talk about fresh, we all talk about local. And yet there have been events in the last couple of months that affected a company that liked to talk about food with integrity, to like to talk about finding food that was local and food that was fresh. I'm talking, of course, about Chipotle. And in fact, the events that affected them in terms of food safety issues threatened the brand. And even though they have done everything they can do they say, to sort of fix the situation and go forward in a positive fashion, the fact of the matter is nobody knows why what happened. It's a little scary. So my question is, and they're having to change the way they come to market, and they're changing the way they source, and they are changing to a degree their relationship with suppliers. So what challenges does that create in terms of food safety issues, in terms of vigilance, that the companies in this room need to think about? Because it's not a matter anymore of coming out with the best Beet Kvass. I'm probably mispronouncing that in 9 different ways. Oh, really? But it's a matter of being able to certify in a lot of ways exactly why that is safe, and to do it to the satisfaction not just of consumers, not just to the satisfaction of the retailer or whatever the institution is that's selling it, but also to the satisfaction of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in accordance with the new FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act rules. We can talk a little bit more about that. So, Carol, you've got a microphone there. So, you know, what challenges are these creating?
Well, they're going to be significant, especially to those of you that are looking as artisan food producers to starting out with a certified cottage kitchen. And those that are not making a meat-related product, this is certainly something that's achievable. It is going to be, I think, increasingly important for many consumers, and certainly for those in the retail marketplace, to know about where your food is being processed and the characteristics and certification of the food processing facility where your food is being processed and packaged. That standard is going to be, I think, a heightened level of diligence, and the demands that are going to be put upon you are going to be much stricter than they have been heretofore, and you need to anticipate and prepare for it. There are new federal standards that are being made of the farmers and suppliers and producers of ingredients. You need to know about those. They're being published in the Federal Register. The farming community throughout the country is being made ready. A few years ago, they were introduced, small farmers especially, to something called GAP, Good Agriculture Practices. Now they're being called upon to post-harvest treat their foods with a set of standards that take them into the food system and move them with as much attention to their safety in the food chain as can be attached.
I would love to continue commenting on this, actually, because for in distribution, the larger the organization that you end up working with, the absolutely more detail and stringent rules we have to follow to carry your product at all. And it's a constant discussion in distribution, and I know that we're not the only distributors that talk about it. It has to be everyone, because if you make something and we're going to sell it, we have to be able to prove to the person we're selling it to that we only stock and supply the things that are made in the safest, most transparent way possible, so that when a recall does happen, and they will happen, we can get that product off the shelf. We can make sure the consumer is safe, that you are safe, and that nothing will harm a person. That is probably one of the more expensive places that a small maker can actually face, because you not only need to know how to regulate yourself in your manufacturing, but you need to know the right people to get to survey what you're doing and audit you, and how often auditing needs to take place. It's expensive, but if you want to get bigger, you have to do it, and it's unavoidable.
Totally agree, and I think that, you know, for large distributors or large retailers, the legal liability is extended to them. And you know, if you're a Kroger, for example, which is now the world's second largest retailer, and I think one of the largest natural products sellers, or if not the largest in the country today, you don't want an incident like what happened at Chipotle to damage your reputation. And so you're going to be very stringent on the supply. At the same time, you know, large companies want to, as we said earlier, want to have those local innovative products under the shelf. I think that creates an opportunity for distributors, or I think locally here in Oregon on the produce side, Organically Grown Company, which works with lots of small producers and really helps those producers upgrade their safety standards, because it's very hard for them as an individual producer to get under the shelf at a Safeway or an Albertsons, or even into distribution here at New Seasons.
Just one last thing. One of the things that is a consequence of this, of course, is that it attaches value to regional and to small runs. And it's a different way of thinking about your product and regional food clusters and local lines. And it's one of the things that truly does attach flavor to a locality, a community, an area, a region. There's conversation, for example, about establishing a Cascadian region for food, as is the case in Italy, where you have the Tuscan region, or you have the Lake District with different kinds of cheeses in the UK. Similarly, we're going to start to see the emergence of lines of food that will not travel, that will just stay local, that will just be artisan, that can manage the risk within the locality because of these demands. The bigger the reach in terms of distribution and run, the higher the risk, the more heightened the demand, and the more rigorous the requirement.
Yeah, and just if I can just talk a little bit about this for a second, because it's something I know a little bit about, emphasis on a little bit. I mean, one of the things that the Food Safety Modernization Act requires is stringent record keeping. And that's going to be important, I'm going to guess, to almost everybody in this room. The fact is that the new Food Safety Modernization Act requires retailers, if the Food and Drug Administration shows up and says, we need to see your records on XYZ, you are required to be able to, that retailer is required to provide those records. It's either within 24 or 48 hours, or to be found in violation of the Act. And violation of the Act could mean a lot of different things, including a possible perp walk for the CEO, because CEOs are now personally responsible. It's not a matter of just being able to shuffle it down the line. And so what it means is that retailers are starting to say, we need to, if we're going to have our records in line so we can respond to that challenge from FDA, it means that we're going to have to require the same thing of the companies with which we do business, which puts a big challenge on manufacturers. The interesting thing, and it probably applies more to the companies in this room, or the startups in this room, is that while, as I understand it, while you have to be of a certain size to kind of fall under the auspices of the Food Safety and Modernization Act, retailers that I've talked to have said, doesn't matter. We're going to require that of everybody. Because if we have a problem with a product, looking at our customers and saying, oh, they were a small company, it really didn't matter, they weren't covered by the Act, won't matter. So they're saying they're going to require the same things. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are finding the same thing, but they're going to require the same stuff of the small companies as the big companies. So I guess the message is, and I know this sounds really downbeat for the first 15 minutes of a panel discussion that's first thing in the morning. I'm beginning to feel like a eunuch at an orgy. Just work that one through your mind. Yeah, it's okay. But the thing is, it's something you got to keep in mind. And so as you're starting forward, and I'm sure you would say the same thing, keep stringent records. No, so if anybody comes to you and asks a question, you can answer it. Because it seems to me that not having an answer to the question is the worst possible response for legal reasons and, quite frankly, brand equity reasons. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And that means that those of you that are working closely, as is often the case here in the Northwest, with farmer suppliers, you want to have an assurance that they are adhering to GAP standards because a large number of you are working with relatively small farmers. So you want to know that they are adhering to good agriculture practice. They need not be certified as organic. That's a rather expensive proposition for a small farmer, but they can be adhering to these standards and working with Extension and having that certification, which is relatively inexpensive, and keeping the records that demonstrate that they don't have dogs running through their crops, defecating on the fields, etc. La, 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 la.
La, 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 la. Okay. It's a charming image. Okay, so, but let's talk about the more positive side of it. In terms of when companies like the ones in this room are interested in talking to retailers, do you think has the process changed largely? I mean, I've been writing about the industry for a long time, and it seems to me that one of the things that has happened is that by and large, especially in larger retailers, they are far more focused on efficiency than they necessarily on effectiveness. And A, do you agree with that? And B, what challenges does that create for for small companies that are trying to kind of find placement in the stores? Carol, why don't you start?
They have identified that there's value in disruption, and they are noticing that. And many of the big companies are in touch with the fact that they need to have a little bit of zip and energy in their enterprise, and they are making provisions to invite you in. Those of you that are small, innovative food producers, and they want that initiative, they want to have that variety, they will try to work with you and find the appropriate route. It might be through deli. It might not be through categories that you think you're going to be in, but they will be open to you if you know how to ask the right questions and posit yourself in such a way as to make your product purposeful for them.
But can I ask you a question about that? Which is, if I had a nickel for every retailer who said, I believe in disruption, and then does things because that's the way they've always done them, I'd have a lot of nickels. And so I guess my question is there a way to position oneself so you can be disruptive without being, I guess, too disruptive? Because these guys have these companies have cultures that's really hard to break through. Or am I overstating the problem?
I think you're overstating the expectations. And I think that those of you that think that having an opportunity to access a few Whole Food stores is going to get you into the chain is wishful thinking.
Yeah, and actually there was a news article that came out either yesterday or the day before that Whole Foods is actually making more of their buying more centralized, which kind of feeds into the first part of your question. Is it changing, and in what way, essentially? And in some retailers, they have centralized a lot of their buying. Kroger is a really great example of this. We work a lot with them, so we hear a lot about them. Most of their buying is done in Cincinnati. So if you want to get into the chain, the whole thing at all, you have to display at Cincinnati, which means a plane ticket, which means finding out what on earth that they're looking for, which means investing in promotions and figuring out how to price yourself right. Who do you actually want to see at their location, because each category has a different buyer. And Whole Foods, it sounds like it's going pretty similar route. They said some, not all. And then you have, on the other side, they have their desire to be disruptive, just like everybody else does. And then they have local foragers. Actually, one of the chains calls it local foragers, and other times they call them local buyers. Everyone has a name, and everyone wants to have that product in there, but they have to follow the same enormously difficult policies. So you need to do your research before you walk into anyone these days, no matter how big or how small they're looking.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that I remember talking recently to one of the local foragers in this region, and the question to her was, well, what products are you not interested in? And it was a little bit of a hard question, but she said, please don't bring me another barbecue sauce or another, and to the point, or another jam. And obviously there's jams out there and barbecue sauces that are entering, but the trend is there's so much more variety. And for a retailer, it's all about space. It's all about, there's a limited amount of space, and we've talked before, we talk about square footage or square inches in a store. I also hear cubic space in the store. So there's they're looking at the store as a selling environment, and anything that goes into the store means something comes out of the store. So you really need to understand the motivations and interests of your customers, distributor, as well as the retailer, and how your product is adding their sales into their product category. If it's not additive, there's not a real reason for them to bring you on.
Yeah, I mean, the question is different, isn't it? I mean, when Tom talks to square inches, it was funny. It was at a class that Tom and I have taught here at Portland State the last 4 or 5 summers, I guess. And we actually had what ended up being a sales call take place in the class, where this young man, really smart young man, who was starting up a beef jerky company, really good beef jerky, made with like Cabernet and beer. But he presented, we had a couple of retailers who were visiting the class. So we said, make a sales call. And it went really interesting. It went really well. But one of the questions they asked him, was, what's your margin per square inch? Margin per square inch. Listen, he didn't know the answer to that question. It was like the only question he didn't know the answer to. But I got to be honest with you, I'd never heard that question before. I don't think you had ever heard that question before. But they said, listen, we're single store operators, and margin per square inch matters. It wouldn't necessarily be the thing that would kill the deal or not kill the deal, but they needed to know that because it mattered in terms of the choices they had to make. So to those of you who are like launching new products, think about that for a second. What's my margin per square inch? Kroger might not ask that question. Green Zebra might. And so you have to make a decision.
It depends on where you are in the store, too. If you're at the end cap, the margin per square inch means a lot. You're talking real estate. And if you're on a block that's where the Ritz is, then you've got to have and command the square inch space. But if you're, back where the warehouse is, it might be a little bulkier. So you've got to think about that. If you've got a jerky that's on the end cap, square inch is what you got to be ready to give in terms of your margin when you're arguing for it. So you got to think about where you are in the retail space and what retail space you are in. When we got ready for this panel, we were talking about, well, where is food not being sold? What's the space where you're not going to find food sold today? Think about it. And then figure out where your product is and zero in on that.
Hey, Tom, what about things like slotting allowances and promotional fees and even in certain cases, failure fees? Is it your sense, because you talk to as many or more retailers as I talk to, what's the trend on that, and is it going to affect the kind of the startups and the companies in this room?
It's definitely going to affect companies that are looking to scale up. And I think there's opportunities to get into the store if you have into limited distribution, if you have something interested that is like something that is going to be a hot item for the retailer and help establish their reputation for local. But as you scale up into more general distribution, it becomes a numbers game. And one of the things, too, that I think we kind of alluded to is all the large retailers have systems, information systems, and getting listed in Boise or Pleasanton or Cincinnati, you need to have your information system link into their system. So then the partnerships with your distributor become particularly key for you as well.
So I'd like to add to that too, is the promotional fees, and sometimes you actually have slotting fees that you have to pay to the retailer in order to be on the shelf. If you don't know what a slotting fee is, essentially you're paying to have the space. You are now buying a physical location. So not only are you going to give them money later to be able to promote your brands, because that then makes you and them more money, because you're hauling more product through that spot, but you're paying them for that spot as well. And then in addition to that is later on, if something doesn't go well, you have the potential of having to repay that particular retailer or store or what have you if you guarantee your line. Guarantee being, if I want to bring it back to the store, I can get my money back. Well, now they're going to want to carry that back from retailer to distributor and distributor to the manufacturer, and guess who ends up paying for it? Manufacturers. So if it doesn't go well and they have to pull it off the shelf, say they have 6 bottles of your barbecue sauce left and they have to take it off, they're going to ask for credit. And if you've guaranteed it, credit is what they'll get in one way or another. Because it's margin and they need to make it, otherwise the whole system doesn't work. So it will become very expensive long term.
And to put it in context for those of you who may be aghast at this, a lot of retailers, if you look at the amount of money they get on in terms of promotional allowances and slotting allowances and things like that, that amount of money chain wide can track very closely to that company's profit. That is very often a lot of where the profit comes from. And so if they didn't have slotting allowances, they wouldn't be making a lot of money. So this is a matter of profit and loss for these guys. This isn't just a matter of, trying to get extra money out of companies, right?
Yeah, and if you look at the volume, particularly of a traditional retailer, let's say a Safeway or Albertsons, probably of the total volume that a store does, roughly 50% is coming from products that are on promotion. So, you know, having a promotion schedule built into your products and sort of understanding the marketing plan with that is becoming increasingly more key, and it takes resources to invest.
Yeah. You all kind of refer to various times to the whole artisan trend, which is fascinating to me. First question, how much of that do you guys see as being reflected more here in the Pacific Northwest, here in the Cascadia region, than in other parts of the country? I mean, we have it. I mean, back in Connecticut, there's a sense of it, but when I'm here, I feel it in a much broader sense than I would back home.
Well, let me just start with that. Many of you, I think, are from the Portland area, but if you look outside at the break, you'll see the Portland Farmers Market, which opened today. And in a good day in the summer, there'll be nearly 20,000 people going through the farmers market. And, you know, there's farmers markets all over the country, but just before we came in today, we're talking to one of the vendors there, and the Washington Post has given a #2 in the country rating to the Portland Farmers Market, and I think that is indicative that we are a little bit ahead of the curve here. And I think a lot of organizations, people that I talk to that are coming from other parts of the country, looking for innovative products here that can be marketed, you know, throughout the country.
I think #1 was Santa Monica, if I'm not mistaken.
No, actually, they said #1 was New York.
Union Square?
Exactly.
Okay.
And having been, you know, you and I have been to the Union Square often, and, you know, I really think, as a Portlander, I'm bi-coastal, that what you see outside can't be compared to just about anything. Europe is the only place you're going to find anything as remarkable as what's out your door here. And some of the displays out there are so painterly and so beautiful. If you can get out to take a walk, just go out and enjoy it. It's delightful.
In my town, we have a farmer's market. It's 8 card tables. 4 of them are for tomatoes and 4 for corn.
Really? That's sad. I happen to think that the Northwest has laid claim to artisan food in many respects because of the extraordinary bounty that the land has yielded. In Oregon alone, you have over 280 different products being grown by your food producers that give you a palette as an artist to create products that are extraordinary. And with that kind of a yield in just this state, California is the only other state in the country that has a broader panoply of ingredients, and Washington certainly rivals it. So it's for that availability of product that stimulates the creative spirit. Food is a medium of expression in this area that has invited creative souls. You know, Chef Pally, for example, who is a well-regarded chef here in the Portland community, who created the Pally Bar, which was a precursor of many of the high-energy, healthy food bars at the Food Innovation Center when it first opened, is an example. He had gone to Juilliard. Here is a man who chose to, rather than be a concert pianist, elected to be a great chef. But the same creative impulse, that same part of the brain that made him make great music, lets him make great food.
It's interesting, though. I think, you know, you talk about expression. And I guess the one thing that I always think that companies, especially startup companies, need to do if they want to get into the marketplace, they wanted to get into stores and they want to get to, or institutions or whatever, food service, whatever it happens to be, and find their way into consumers' kitchens, is I think it's important to sort of refine your ability to tell your story. I think the ability to tell a story is incredibly important. And I think certainly in the world that I spend a lot of my time writing about, the companies that go off the rails are the ones that sort of lose connection with the story. I mean, I think that's what's happening to Whole Foods at some degree right now. They've sort of lost their narrative. And I think certainly that's a problem that Walmart's having. I mean, we're talking 2 different ends of the spectrum, right? But they've lost their narrative, and they're desperately trying to get it back. Companies can have a really strong narrative in a lot of different ways. I mean, if you look at a New Seasons or you look at a Zupans, or you look at this, if you haven't been there, there's a wonderful new store on the other side of the river called Provedore, which is wonderful. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. An Irish kid from New York. I shouldn't be, you know. But it's wonderful, and yet, you know, but also stores like Winco. Winco knows exactly what it is, right? And it knows its narrative. And so it seems to me that that's one of the things that companies like the ones out here need to do is really understand what their story is and figure out how to tell it in a compelling way.
I completely agree with that. The companies that I've seen that come into distribution and want to come into distribution, the ones that do the best have done all their homework, they've done all the research, they're ready to go, but they know who they are, and they really know what it is that they're trying to fit. And they're playing to that in the market, and they're not pulling any punches. They know every step of the way, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, actually. I think Sarah had mentioned values as part of your proposition, and I think that that absolutely has to ring true through what you're doing. Local, obviously, has been all the trend, but really I think it speaks down to the core of what are your values. Do you want to support your neighbor? Do you want your neighbor to support you? Do you want to see a more sustainable environment? Do you want your product to really stand for something? And whatever that something is, make sure that's part of your story, because if it isn't, it's likely that the consumer won't catch on as well. And sometimes you can have an okay product, and that's great. But if you have an outstanding story, you're going to stand heads and necks and shoulders and everything above the person who's got a fantastic product and doesn't know how to tell their story at all. I've seen it happen so many times.
Tom?
Yeah, I absolutely. You know, I think, you know, in academia we call these the credence factors, and you know, telling your story in an authentic story becomes real in it. And you know, in retail where you see that, you know, retailers would love to have the founders of a company demo those products because it creates an experience for retail, which I think goes along with these credence and value alignment factors, is kind of coming back to something that our lead speaker Paul talked about, is the experience. I think retailers can learn a lot from the restaurant side of things and creating an experience and bringing that excitement and total package, I guess, for the consumer.
The destination stop, the high-touch supermarket, the high-touch retailer is in fact, in the retail community, the only way for the small stores that you're seeing appear on the small chains, like here in Portland, the New Seasons model, to differentiate themselves from these larger, overarching national chains, the Albertsons and the Safeway. So you have appearing throughout the country high-touch models and small models that are responsive to what their locality requires. And in densely populated settings, you're seeing something that would be the grocery store that we see up here, which would be less than 15,000, an average 15,000, less than 20,000 square foot store. Groceries focus, principally what they're offering, appearing where people know your name as you start to appear. Again, surprise, surprise. And thinking and being responsive to carrying just a few items that you say you want. Again, surprise, surprise. That won't happen. And it couldn't possibly happen in these larger enterprises, but these smaller stores are prepared to do that. And those are the stores where you should be preparing to approach and offer a small run and offering to do a Saturday demo, because those are the stores that are somewhat like the farmer's market outside, which is where you do your focus studies. When you have a product you're developing, you get yourself a table and see what people respond to that you're making, and get your numbers and be able to show that people, you know, that it's walking off the shelves as people are going by. That's where the real laboratory is, out that door.
And to go back 1 second on the whole power of a great story, to go back to where we almost started this, Chipotle has a great story. And if anything saves that brand through its problems, it's going to be the fact that Chipotle has a great story. I can't tell you, I have 2 kids living at home, 21 and 26. I can't get them to leave. And because when they leave, I'm moving to Oregon. But you know, it's funny. I told them like 2-3 months ago, listen, do me a favor. I don't want you going to Chipotle anymore. I wanted to see where this works out. Almost every week, they would come to me and say, is it okay now? Can we go back? There's some Portland State students who I've had this same conversation with, and they've said, oh, man, I can't go right now, but I can't wait to go back. Because they have a really powerful story. Now, that story can get subverted, but if you have a great story, it can help you get past a lot of different problems. Like Paul, I have no idea if there are questions on that screen or not. There are a lot of questions. Oh my goodness, I wish you'd raised your hand 10 minutes ago. We'll ask away. Let's do it real quickly. I know we have a hard stop here, but we'll soften the stop up a little bit. Because I think there's only a break after this, right? So we could stay as long as you want us to. It's not a problem. I got nowhere to go. So go ahead, ask questions. If anybody wants to go get a cup of coffee, use the facilities, feel free, but we can hang. Go ahead. Questions? You want me to come down there and do it? A lot of questions. Hang on. Okay. You guys are here. No, you hold that. I can shout. Like I said, I have children. Let's see. Oh, thank you. So we made our first purchase this week from Thrive Market. Seeing e-commerce so low, do you expect e-commerce to grow slowly or quickly? You want to take that? You want me to? Go. Anybody? Quickly. In fact, however quickly you think it's going to grow faster. It's inevitable. And, you know, and it's not just going to be Amazon. It's going to be driven by a lot of different things. I mean, Walmart is spending $1.5 gazillion trying to figure out how to grow its e-commerce thing. A lot of companies are going to keep up. And by the way, one of those companies is going to be Kroger, Fred Meyer. They're going to really blow this out. I'm told that they're going to, and they're going to be doing things that are really, really interesting that are going to be game changers in the e-commerce business. So watch for that. It's going to happen fast and faster. What recommendations do you have for rural food innovators around retail distribution and proactively incorporating trending categories? Go.
I think that you're going to have to find a way to manage your access to the cold chain. And I think that you're really going to have to identify and work with local food hubs. Those of you that are not near metro areas are really going to have to give a lot of thought to food hub management and engagement in a local food hub.
Somebody.
So if you're in a rural area, that's absolutely, I completely agree with everything Carol said. It is difficult and expensive for someone to drive a large refrigerated or frozen truck out to rural areas. So they're going to likely ask you, where is your consolidator? If you don't know what a consolidator is, I would go ahead and just Google it really quick. But it's a warehouse where you can drop your product and they have other products that are stored there that we, as a distributor, can come and pick up, or as a retailer can come and pick up if they do their own distribution, or even just something smaller. But you need to find a consolidator and work with them. The food hubs are a huge help now that I've seen those start to pop up more and more.
USDA's Ag Marketing Service has been behind the proliferation of these, and there are special funds that the U.S. Rural Development Division has made available to encourage the organization of these, particularly in outlying rural communities, so that rural producers can now begin to access with their smaller runs the opportunities that have been denied them heretofore.
Let's move on to the next one. Tom, what do you see for the business model, the future of the Provedore business model? You and I were there the other night for the opening party. So what do you think the future of that model is?
Well, I wish there was one in my neighborhood. And I would encourage it. Provedore is about 5,000 square foot store. It's located on 23rd and Sandy. It's basically what used to be FoodWorx in partnership with the former regional head of Whole Foods have kind of come together, and they have 5 or 6 independent vendors who have basically set up kiosks within the store. But when you buy the product, it's all centrally integrated. Very experiential driven. Kevin and I were there and sampled in the store oysters, which were served to us while we were drinking Prosecco. life could be worse. Yeah, I definitely think
And
it's a food
yeah.
experience, and you know, you got to believe it. The prosciutto was great prosciutto cut for you there, great selection of cheeses, and it's an environment that I think, I'm stealing words from Kevin, makes you hungry, and we all know what happens when you're in a store and you're hungry.
Yeah, let's say they had a seafood purveyor, which was Flying Fish. They had a bakery purveyor. What was the name of the? I'm not familiar enough with the local companies, but they had a bakery. They had meat, seafood, floral, and produce, and it was fascinating. And it's a really interesting model. When you ask about the future of it, I mean, Bruce Silverman will say this thing can grow. And it could grow not just in other locations in the Pacific Northwest, it could potentially be a much bigger company than that. In certain cases, they might bring some of those vendors with them. And in other cases, they might go into, you know, if they went to Austin, Texas, probably a bad example because there's so much competition there from like Whole Foods, but if they went to Austin, Texas, they might have 3 or 4 other purveyors. So it's a really I think it's a really interesting model. Let's see. Do we believe that Big Food will use Chipotle as an example that small local producers cannot be trusted for safety? How will small producers fight back? Anybody want to grab that?
I'm going to grab that. I don't think so. What happened with Chipotle is a nightmare situation, and I think that they're taking the right steps to fix it long term. I think that what they will be asking for, if they're talking about the larger chains and retails and so forth, they're just going to be asking for more paperwork, transparency, and food safety documentation and assurance from a small producer and a small farmer that they're being treated correctly in the food chain. You cannot play around with food safety, especially, and it's a perfect example. But what I think they'll do instead, they won't use it as an example to move away from it. They'll use it as an example to prove that you need to have the right safety plans, and that is pretty much it.
Okay. Next question. Aside from
hey, Kevin, we'll just do one more question.
One more question.
Yep.
But if anybody wants to come, we'll hang up here. So let's see. Let's pick one. The organic food industry learned consumers' willingness to pay for their product decreased during the last recession. How recession-proof is the local trend? Good way to end.
Yeah, I think that people are willing to buy less if it has heightened quality, and that has endured. And I think that you need to accept that the studies that Stanford did regarding, for example, organic, where they said organic is the same nutrient value as non-organic, has been disputed by studies done at UK and Washington State University, saying no. Organic really is healthier. People bought that. People will pay the premium. They will pay the premium. And though people say local trumps organic, they're revisiting that. They are really in touch with what you put in your body affects your health, because their health care bills are off the wall. And if their responsibility for what they eat affects their health care costs, and in fact their wellness and enjoyment of life, they're going to pay the premium.
And if I can just add one final comment, and then we'll go. To answer that question a little bit, don't think about price. Think about value. Value is an incredibly important word. And because it cuts across, it has to do with price, but it also has to do with a much larger picture. There's a retailer back east called Wegmans, which some of you may be familiar with. And I've gone to focus groups where Wegmans, go figure, gets rated. While they have wonderful food service, wonderful prepared foods, wonderful customer service, very often they get some of the highest marks for price. But when you ask consumers what they're thinking about, consumers aren't saying prices are cheap. They're saying they get more for their money. So however you're positioning yourselves, however you're trying to tell your story, it's incredibly important that you focus on the notion of value, which cuts across lines. And I suspect, having spent a little time out here with some folks like you, that's a really important word to you. It has to do with what's in stores, what we put in our bodies, and how we live our lives. So with that, I thank you very much for your time this morning. Join me in thanking our panel.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you all so much.